Evidence of Freewheeling is the title of the debut collection from Sligo-born writer Trevor Conway. Science and nature are long-running interests of Trevor's, resulting in poems with sometimes unusual subject matter. Trevor is in our Galway studio and is here to tell us more. Let's just start with one of the poems in the collection, which is a very early poem, in fact, from your own writing. When did you write Father and Son in the Pub, Trevor?
I was about 15, Sean, when I started that poem. I remember it well back then. Since then, it's changed a lot. I'd say all the main ideas or sentiments are still there, but the language has changed so much.
Well, okay, let's hear then the revised version over those many years to the poem that you have today in this collection, Father and Son in the Pub.
His arm, arched over my head, ushers me through the wooden door. I scan the lit faces of middle-aged men who throw glances, mounting a stool by the bar, I'm a king on my throne. 2 glasses before us, the inequality so brazen. I fight the temptation, but it drains to a puddle, paler in its paucity. His glass a statue, with barely a chip taken. Darting looks, heavy breaths, revised posture. None convince him to drink faster, as he mixes words with the other men. A slap on the bar from the man with the red face kicks off a round of laughter, but I don't get their humour. While my father's back is turned, I steal a taste. He sees me, but ignores the fact. I stare at the white strands framing his face, the curious shape of his stubble, the froth hanging on his lip. I want to have that power, and now I do. I've tasted the salmon, rotten with knowledge. There's froth on my face. I don't even know how it got there. Can't even remember the taste.
Trevor Conway reading his poem Father and Son in the Pub from his debut collection Evidence of Freewheeling. Trevor, you were saying that you wrote that poem back in your early teens. Was it the first poem you wrote, or did you start writing even earlier than that?
It wouldn't have been the very first. I can only guess it was around 10th or so. I do remember messing about with a few that would have been very just vague, unfocused kind of poems, it's kind of random phrases. But I think up until I was about 22, I wrote like 150 poems, and I ended up ditching all of them apart from 2 or 3.
Yeah, that's interesting that you actually at a certain point in your 20s went back to those early poems and got, like, when you say you ditched them, did you put them in a drawer somewhere that you might go back to them, or did you actually destroy them?
I actually had a copy, I think maybe probably 2 copybooks because there's so many of poems, and I think I just went through them and I just went, that one's crap, and then I just found literally only 2 or 3 that I thought were decent. So I think I must have written them down into another copybook, and then I did get rid of the other copybook or 2 copybooks that I had. I just knew I just needed to do that. And
you get rid of means you actually destroy them.
Yeah, I dumped them or whatever.
So they're gone from your. What does doing that? What did that do for you to actually shed them totally?
I don't know. I think it was just admitting to myself that what I had done wasn't good enough. In a practical sense, it's hard to describe what it did. I don't know.
Is there a sense, though, that there was a point then, maybe in your 20s, when you had that shedding was done and you held on to the 2 or 3 poems? Was that a sort of a starting point, if you like, of your career as a professional writer? Were you thinking in those terms?
No, not really. I suppose I always had my own little private career. I think maybe lots of writers do, even though they might think they won't ever get published or whatever. You have a certain, I don't know, timeline or something in your mind, or a certain graph. Just that, like, in terms of, say, collecting poems into a collection, I would have put some in folders well before I even sent out to publishers. Just your own little kind of, and same with short stories and stuff,
All right, I want you to read one of your nature poems. Now, even the title of this poem I'm slightly nervous about. Maybe you'd give it to me, actually.
I'm not sure if I'm saying this correctly, but I call it Fasciola hepatica.
Fasciola hepatica. Do you want to tell us what's involved here, or will you just read it for us and explain afterwards?
I'll give a brief thing if you want. I mean, that name Fasciola hepatica it's the Latin, the animal, the technical name for a species, and the species in this case is liver fluke. I became interested in this really through leaving cert biology. We studied the life cycle of the liver fluke, and I was always just so intrigued by the life cycle, how it has a very short time, I think it's something like 48 hours, to get from where it's born, which is basically a pile of feces, and has to get from that to a river and find a snail and stuff. And sometimes it penetrates a sheep instead of a cow, but just the whole life cycle is very fascinating, and I've tried to deal with it in, I suppose, a slightly abstract but maybe interesting way. So, Fasciola hepatica. You are born into feces on dew-laden grass. Emerge from your egg at 10 degrees. Crawl through bending blades till water sings like a siren. By a rock, a constellation of frog spawn. The flow is cold and fast. Hours of swirling, searching, survival grows dimmer. The humped back of a snail. Your spine penetrates its soft flesh. You feed as it feeds, live through its life. Hairs loosen, cells change. Larvae form within you. A tail whips as you burrow free from the carcass. The empty shell, lined with rotting flesh, drifts with the current. A green path tips through the water. From blade to soggy blade, you struggle on. Each passing animal could be your survival. A muck-coated leg plunges into the soil and passes on. The grass grows dry and you suffer. Evening closes, offering dew. Warm breath passes over you. The crunch of jaws around you taken into the mouth with a clump of wet grass. On you move, over the tongue, until you reach the liver. Fattening, attached to the bile duct, you are where you belong.
Trevor Conway with his poem Fasciola hepatica from his debut collection Evidence of Freewheeling. I was interested to hear, Trevor, to read that there's one of the poems in the book called Black and White. You believed that prior to 1950, this is as a child you believed this, prior to 1950 everything was black and white.
I did indeed, yeah. I used to take things quite literally when I was young, and sometimes still do, leading to confusion. But yeah, so my parents, when I saw something on TV and it was in black and white, I probably asked, why isn't it in colour? Why is it like that? And my parents told me, it was a film from a long time ago. So I suppose my own logic went working off by itself and deduced that the world was black and white up until sometime around 1950. When Technicolor came in.
But that type of precision, I know, like, we can laugh at it and say that, you maybe you're a little bit pedantic as a child, but that type of precision, does it help you then when it comes to the precision in description, I suppose? When it comes to the writing of the poems, is it quite a long process for you to get from the scribbled down version that it might start out as in your notebooks or whatever to the finished poem that we get in this, the finished poems that we get in this collection?
It generally would. I'd write a note down somewhere if I have my notebook handy, and it could be years, often around months or a year before I actually return to the idea, because I'd be writing another poem at the time, and I'd have, loads of different ideas to get around to. So then I'd whenever I finally do return to that poem or that idea in the notes copy, it would, I suppose, be the actual writing of the poem itself. And from there, I would say I tend to plan out poems a good bit. And I might spend the guts of a week, a few days anyway, planning it out and then writing it. I used to be more structured about that, but I found in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, I'm itching to write the first line while I'm still about 2/3 of the way through the planning process. So I often now write the guts of a first verse before I have the whole thing planned out.
Interesting you use the word verse there, because I know you're writing a novel at the moment, but you also write music. Where does the poetry sit in relation to the music? And I know that you talk about people like Bob Dylan as influences with their lyrics, I presume.
Yeah, very much so. Both in poetry and in songwriting, I find someone like Dylan, or of course the late Bowie, just the lyrics that they come up with, they're so interesting. So in Dylan's case, just so abstract, and I'm talking about maybe the lesser known songs, not like the protest songs so much. Songs like Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands and Visions of Johanna, and Like a Rolling Stone, which is more well known. Just a very abstract lyric that make you think. I think they're kind of working on association. Like you get a word and you kind of use a word that's out of context, but maybe related only in your own mind, and the reader might not totally get the connection. But it's just interesting.
I want you to finish up, Trevor, if you would, by reading the poem, reading a poem called Canines at the Ready. Explain maybe what your idea was here, the position you put yourself into as a poet, and I suppose it reflects your interest in science in some ways.
Yeah, nature more so. like I'm a big fan of nature programs and what like David Attenborough kind of stuff, the big cats on the plains there in Serengeti and stuff. With this poem, I went with the technique of adopting the actual voice and perspective of something rather than a person or not even a character. It's an animal, and in this case, it's I imagined a leopard or a cheetah stalking up on prey, and I wanted to reflect the slow, measured steps in the rhythm of the poem itself. So this is Canines at the Ready. Creeping slowly, staring intensely, stepping, stopping, stepping. You chew, I am riveted, cloaked in the silence of camouflage. I value you in protein, lust for your flesh. It is my right to take you. Stepping, stopping, stepping. Still oblivious, still chewing, unlistening. I come closer, ready to strike. I pounce, wrestle, open my mouth. There's daggers in my smile. Welcome to my body.
Trevor Conway with his poem Canines at the Ready, which comes from his debut collection Evidence of Freewheeling, which is published by Salmon Poetry. I'm glad to see that we have a text in saying excellent pronunciation of liver parasite, which I'm not doing again. But the text goes on, after 42 years as a microbiologist, great to hear a poem about a microorganism.